Okay, so let me set this up. This is ArcGIS Pro. You can probably see very clearly we're looking at a portion of southeast Idaho, and by glancing over here at our contents pane, you can see that we are looking at one layer, and that is our roads layer. Now, this layer has been clipped from a Western US wide, very comprehensive roads layer for the entire Western US that we assembled using data from the USGS, data from US Forest Service, some state, county entities, and so on and so forth. It was a gigantic, or is a gigantic data set of well over 3 million, maybe it's 8 million arcs or lines. Now for this workshop, I've trimmed this down so it doesn't have as many lines associated with it, just so it doesn't draw slowly if I zoom in, zoom out, and those sort of things. So that's what we're looking at here. This is a roads layer for the Western United States, zoomed into southeastern Idaho. And what's interesting here is this attribute table. As I said, the majority of this was really put together by the USGS and made available for download or access via their website. And we look at a lot of different fields here, and we see some coded fields. Now, some of these, like TNMFRC, hint, hint, we should probably put an alias over the top of this field so it makes sense to people immediately. That's one of the things we're going to be covering in our full-day workshop in January. We have another, field full street name. That makes good sense. Then we see this one right over here, MTFCC_code. And we see S1400, S1400, S1200. Now, for some folks who use this roads layer or similar roads layer on a day-to-day basis, you know what an MTFCC code is. You probably even recognize some of these actual values. But the majority of people out there will not understand what the heck these things are. And so, as I've said to a lot of my students, a lot of people participating in workshops, I think it's our job as GISers, the few GIS professionals who work with this stuff day in and day out, to make our data as useful as possible to all those different people who do utilize GIS and GIS data. So the question then is, what in the world is an MTFCC code? Well, first thing I would do to answer that question is I'd go out to Bing or Google, whatever you like, and type in MTFCC. And it immediately finds stuff of interest, and just as I suspected, we'd be probably going to the census. This is a good link right over here. So the T comes from Tiger, for those of you who've used Tiger products in the past. And what's kind of interesting is there is some PDF documents out here that's going to help us sleuth this out. This one was updated in 2019. We see it sort of looks like a table. We see the MTFCC code, a feature, well, it's a feature class. What is the name of this class? And then a longer description of this. So there's stuff like C, which has nothing to do with roads, you'll notice. So this is a very comprehensive coding system. It's actually 13 pages worth of codes, and it goes all the way down into, eventually we'll see S's, which are streets and so on and so forth. Lots of stuff here, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this. I'm going to download this PDF and take a look at it. This is, as you can see, the exact same PDF that we were looking at online just a little bit ago. And now I'm going to make a conversion of this thing. I'm going to tell it to export this PDF as a spreadsheet into Microsoft Excel. Go ahead and export it. I will say, yeah, I can put this here. I'll just call it test for now because I've actually done this a little while ago, actually quite a while ago. Now, one catching point for you, sticking point for you, is to do this export, you actually have to have the full professional version, as they call it, of Adobe Acrobat, Adobe Acrobat Pro. So we see here now, by the way, Adobe has completed that export, and it immediately launched and displayed my output PDF in Excel format. If you do not have access to Adobe Pro, which is very possible, of course, then what you might want to do is something like this. There's another website that has a web-based table, what you can do with this, now this is really interesting also, is we can just take this. We can take as much as we want. I'll just stop about here, but we could go all the way down to the bottom of this thing. I pressed Shift and clicked at the bottom. So I started clicking and selecting from the upper left corner of the table. I shift and clicked on the lower, let's say, right side of the table. Now I'm going to copy this, and if I go back into Microsoft Excel and I tell it to paste, I can tell it to paste, this is, keep source formatting right here. I can paste in this entire table exactly as it appeared on the web. So one way or the other, even if you don't have Adobe Acrobat Pro, you'll be able to get that table into Excel, and that's an important little step. Okay, once we get this into Pro, what I want to do is I want to clean this up a little bit, because a coded value attribute domain cannot make use of all this stuff. Really what the coded value attribute domain needs is the code letters, these things that are going to match up to this, okay, to this field. So we need that column inside of the Excel spreadsheet. We'll need this column, and then we'll need some sort of wording, some text to actually help that that user. And this may be a user over the web and maybe another user in your enterprise. So we need these two. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of everything else. Now if I mess this up, what you might want to do, or if you're worried about that, what you might want to do is do a save as. I just pressed F12 from my keyboard. I'll call this MTFCCS 2019. That was the original name that I had given it when I first downloaded it. I'm just calling it copy. And it's being stored in the exact same workspace folder for my project where all of my work is being done for this. Go ahead and save this. I'm going to close it up. Close that up. I'll close this up. No, I don't need that saved. Okay. Now the next step is we need to get that Excel spreadsheet brought into ArcGIS Pro. And I'm going to use a tool here called Excel to Table. I'm going to click the Browse button from ArcGIS Pro. Go back here to my project, and this is the one that I just modified, so it'll work very nicely inside of ArcGIS Pro. Now, the reason why I'm doing this and in this way is because I want to have some control over the data types that are being used in this table, okay? So a person you could actually omit this step and go straight to the next step, but you're going to have better luck doing it this way. Excel to table, then the next step is going to be table to domain. Okay, so it's reading this Excel spreadsheet, and once those little blue dots stop spinning past, we'll be able to proceed. Now we have to give this an output table name. So I'm going to tell it that I want to give it a specific name. I'm going to go into my Geodatabase for this project, and I'm simply going to call this MTFCC. That'll do it. And what sheet are we talking about? Well, there's only one, but I do need to set that. It's called Table 1. And we're now going to run this thing. It won't take but a minute, maybe a minute and a half or so to complete this. There we go. It is done and done successfully. And when it completed, it added that output table to my contents pane immediately. Now let's take a look at this table. Right-click, open. That looks nice. MTFCC, and then feature class. So what we have here is, this obviously is text. It can't be numbered because we have a letter in here. And then we have another the other field called feature class is also text, obviously. And this is a temporary table. We're only going to use it for the kind of the interim parts that we're working through here. Next step, going to go back, and now I'm going to find a tool called Table to Domain. Now, sometimes you might have a table or an Excel spreadsheet that you're going to use for this exact same process. And I really encourage you to do this step of Excel to table first, because if the field of interest for the actual coded values, if that should be a short integer, it'll see a number, and normally ARC will make that into a long integer. If it should be a short integer, you're going to have to do a little bit more work. Pretty easy stuff, though, to convert it into a short integer. That's why I like doing it in this way, as I said earlier. But in this case, they're both text, so it really doesn't matter too much, but I still wanted to show you the process. The input table is the thing called MTFCC. Now it's asking us, what is the code field? Well, the code field is this one called MTFCC. There. What's the description field? It's this one right here, feature class. What's the workspace? In other words, what is the geodatabase where this table is going to be built into or converted into a domain? Workspace. Geodatabases are workspaces. So we click here and we say that is the one. Take your time, select it correctly, and it says what is the domain name. Now this doesn't have to be MTFCC. It got this because it simply referenced the name of the input table. If this should not be the name of the domain, then certainly change it. The domain description is kind of free-form text, and it just says feature class. It doesn't have to say that. In fact, it should say something a little bit more meaningful. So let me show you what I mean by this. What do we got here? There we go. Why don't we just use this? Copy it. Paste it, Control V. And what's it going to do? Okay, I do not already have a domain named MTFCC, so this really has no bearing on what it's going to do. Okay, MTFCC, everything looks good. Run this. That too is done. So let's see how it did. I'm going to go back now to my catalog pane, right-click on the geodatabase, and look at my domains. I have a domain in here that I just created. Oh, I had another one in here before called MTFCC codes that I left in there. But this is the one I literally just created. And it did a perfect job. MTFCC is the domain name. There's the description that I just entered. It is a text-based coded value attribute domain. And there is all of our available codes. Not a typo in it, at least not on my part, and I highly doubt that there is a typo in this original source material. So now we're in great shape. This is a huge domain. What I want to do is apply this, right? So I'm going to go over here and go to my fields designer, because now I'm going to modify that MTFCC field. This is it here. You'll notice that. If I come over here, whoops, to domain, there it is, the one we just created, as well as the one that was in there before in my testing. And now I simply want to save it. I'm saving these structural changes to the database. Let it apply those changes. Wonderful. Close it up. Look at there. Now that, far more useful. And yeah, you know, if you use this day in and day out, maybe those S1200s and S1400s mean something to you, but you have to understand that there's so many users of GIS data and so few of us doing it. And a lot of our users are web-based users. We can't sit at their shoulder explaining stuff to them. So this is a fantastic little technique that, as you see, we accomplished in 15 to 20 minutes while I was talking through it nice and slowly. So that's what we have. It improves our user friendliness, our user experience, and certainly turns this, or helps turn this, into actionable information for all the different people who might want to use it. I'll now open the floor for any questions that you may have. Remember to unmute yourself. If you don't have a mic, feel free to put your question into the chat bar.